Alright, hello, Grant here. I'm back and we are continuing our Basics of Cancer series. I'm here and I can certainly answer your questions. I still need a new pun. No one's given me one and that's really sad, actually. Okay, today I'm actually going to try editing these videos. If you noticed, all my other videos have been completely unedited, single shot, and that kind of makes for a bad video. So I'm going to try to add pictures and edit. I'm going to reach down here and press the stop button, then I'm going to cut the video short because I'm using an iPad and it's not the greatest editing tool. But okay, going to try the first edit right now. Alright, I should be in a completely different position now if I actually edit it. Okay, we're immediately going into, today we are doing treatments of cancer, and that's cool because there's a lot of interesting things about treatment of cancer. If you hear lots of people over there, those are my classmates in this class. They're also doing big projects like this, except they're not being respectful of my project. They're not going to quiet anyway, so I'm just going to keep going. See, okay, first off, disclaimer, because, again, I'm a high school student. My research comes from the internet and my own experiences. Don't watch these videos and diagnose yourself with cancer or take any of this too seriously. This is just informational purposes. Alright, before we begin though, we need a bit of a history lesson because you need to understand how surgery's changed throughout the years in order to really get the impact of how cool some of these treatments are and how much of a change there's been over the course of the years. So, history lesson time. We'll get to the science soon, I promise. Okay, cancer. Originally a Greek word. It came from the word carcinos. Carcinos is a Greek word. It means crab. See, originally they saw cancer, they saw a tumor. But they also saw lots of little tendrils coming out of it, and it reminded them of crab legs, so they decided to call it cancer after carcinos. And that's how it all started. That was some of the first recorded cases. The first recorded surgery, however, for cancer was 1600 BC in Egypt. It was breast cancer. They saw several ulcers. I believe it was 8, and they performed surgery to get those out. See, originally, they weren't really sure what was going on. They just cut it out and went on. Really minimal cuts. Really simple, really small cuts. Just remove the lump. That's it. But as they began learning more and more about cancer, they realized, wait, that's not enough to fix the problem. So they began cutting bigger, more cuts, more tissue removed. Basically, they got to the point where they just cut everything out that was even remotely connected to the cancer. Like, if you had a breast cancer, they would cut out a huge little cave and pit into your side to make sure they got rid of everything. We know that's not the case now, though, because of the lymph system. Because we know now that the cancer can spread throughout the lymph system and the blood system. But they didn't know that then, so they had hugely invasive cuts. But as things started rolling here with the other treatments like chemotherapy and radiation, they started making smaller cuts again, removing just the lump. See, it kind of began with Dr. Sidney Farber. That's not a name most people would recognize. He began antifolates, which treated a single type of cancer. These antifolates reduced the size of the cancer, and they started to get pieces together. They pieced together surgery and antifolates and realized, wait, we can cut it out and then treat it with antifolates, and that would deal with a lot of the problems. And that's kind of how they began the whole idea of joint treatments. But we're not going to get into that right now. We're going to move next into chemotherapy. Alright, I moved over to the CDC because it's a lot quieter here than in that classroom. Okay, we said we were moving on to chemotherapy, so we're moving on to chemotherapy now. Now, I earlier said Dr. Sidney Farber was the first person to really use chemotherapy. That's not exactly true depending on what source you're looking at. Some people say that during World War I, mustard gas was possibly used, afterwards, mustard gas was possibly used to treat cancer. I couldn't find many verifying sources. I looked that up. I didn't find a whole lot about it, so we're just going to move right on with Dr. Sidney Farber and his antifolates. Dr. Sidney Farber worked in a cancer ward. He worked with the surgeons that were making these huge invasive surgeries, and he thought there must be a better way, so he did a ton of research. He worked a lot of time. I was reading in a book. He spent an amazing amount of time on this, like an absolutely insane amount of time, and he didn't get a lot of results. There just wasn't a ton for him to find with the tools he had. But he did finally come up with antifolates, and right now we're just going to leave them at chemicals. I might go into more detail later, but it's a pretty complicated deal, at least just off the top of my head to go into. But we're just going to call those chemicals, and they actually worked. They started killing off cancer cells, at least a specific type of cancer. He only got a couple cancers with it. Can't remember what those are off the top of my head. But, again, just chemicals for now. Currently, though, we've really expanded this area. This is one of the biggest areas of research. It's kind of gone into a whole different direction, too. We can now do hormonal therapy, which basically tones down the levels of hormones in your body, which can be directly related to different cancers. Like, I keep going back to the example of breast cancer. If you lower estrogen levels, lowers the amount of cancer. It's not exactly, that's the simplest way to describe it. It's not exactly like that. There's probably a better way to describe it, but that's just the basics. Estrogen goes down, breast cancer level goes down. Roughly, I mean, again, just basics. Now, chemotherapy is designed to kill a targeted area of cancer cells, because cancer cells are weaker than normal cells too, because while they reproduce really fast, they also normally have really thin membranes, and that makes them really weak to different things in the body, like different kinds of chemicals. Again, chemotherapy is basically just chemicals. So those are really weak cells, and when they get hit with this chemical, they just kind of die. They die a couple different ways, like some of them cause cell lysis, some of them just basically dissolve the cell. But the big problem with chemotherapy is, well, it needs to get to those cells somehow, and you can't really just inject it straight in a lot of cases, which means you have to put it in the body some way. And also it's going to spread a little, so you're not just going to be hitting that little patch of cancer, you're going to be hitting everything around it too, and again, that's just going to burn out regular cells too. It's not going to do as much damage, but it still does damage and will cause a lot of other side effects. To get the chemotherapy into the body, you use an IV, but not a typical IV, because normal vessels, they will burn out because of chemotherapy, because it's just that strong. What they do, instead, they take a port into one of the major vessels right near your heart, and that port is a lot thicker vessel. It goes to a lot thicker vessel, which means then it can spread throughout the body with a lot safer. It's not going to basically just be destroying everything in its path. So that's kind of how that would work. And these chemotherapies are different for every type of cancer. There's not one chemotherapy that just treats everything. It's a different one for almost every cancer. Some are used the same. Some of them are classified under different sections, and I'll go into more of that later when I stop getting out of just the basics. But that's chemotherapy in a nutshell. Why we use it, maybe just a tiny bit about that. But that's basically chemotherapy. It basically goes into the body, through the bloodstream, and gets the target area of cancer, and it just starts killing it because of its weak skin. The newest kind of deal, though, that's, okay, and chronologically it goes surgery, chemotherapy, and then radiation, mostly. That's probably the basics of it. So next we're going to go into radiation. Alright, radiation. This is the one I'm really excited about, because I've spent a lot of time in radiation areas and the different oncology wards, and I'm really, really interested in this, because this is a lot of physics and a lot of math, and I like physics and math along with a lot of medicine, so this is really cool for me to talk about. Okay, radiation. That's kind of the newest deal in a lot of the different cancer treatments. It's, because of its usability, it's now available for use, because it was a lot harder to use it back then, back in time, that, whatever. Anyway, no specifics. Again, this can get really technical, and I'd love to talk about that, but again, no specifics. This is just basics, and I'll do specifics later for those people that are actually interested, like all 3 people that watch these videos currently. Okay, radiation. No, it doesn't give you superpowers. And when you use radiation to kill cancer, it's a targeted beam. They use lead shielding to direct the beam, and the beam just hits the area in the body that they're aiming at. They have different ways to aim it, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But it hits the body, it goes through, it hits the cancer, and it basically fries and overloads the cancer cells. It can do that by destroying DNA or a couple other things, like destroying all the really, really weak organelles inside it. All of your body's, all the organelles in your body are really weak, but cancer cells, again, specifically so, because a lot of them aren't protected by a thick membrane. So again, cancer cells die first, and that's great. Otherwise, a lot of these treatments wouldn't really work. So they overload the DNA, basically just kind of destroying it. And that's a bit of a problem, because if you remember earlier I said DNA damage is what can cause cancer. There is sometimes a very, 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 I can't say very enough times, slim chance that they can cause some other type of cancer if it hits a normal cell, and that hits the perfect little strand of DNA to start uncontrolled replication. The chances are really, really small. It's really not that big of a concern most of the time. Okay, a lot of the time, it used to be, radiation would be a lot harder to aim. It used to be just like, here, this is what they're aiming with, this whole little chunk right here. Nowadays, because of the electron shielding that they can make, lead is one of them, and it's not just lead anymore, it's an alloy, and this alloy is really cool. Again, I'll talk about that more later, but they can have a targeted area, so it's, your cancer's tumor is shaped like a completely crazy, non-conformal polygon. It can hit that shape. They can make that shape with the molding, because now they can also use the radiation for imaging, and they can say, okay, the cancer's here. And they do 3D imaging with that, and that's really cool, because that 3D imaging, they bring it up on the screen, and you just have a 3D rotating image of that cancer cell set inside the body. And when they have that, they can choose to aim each different angle, because, okay, the radiation isn't just straight down, here's a little beam anymore. Now it's, okay, we're going to aim from here, then here, then here, then over here, then over here. And that's great because that means no specific area other than the tumor is being constantly bombarded with radiation. And that really lessens the side effects, because it used to be these side effects would be a lot of skin damage. Basically, anything within the path of that radiation would just be really kind of crispy, practically. Not really, but that's a good way to describe it again. But now, because they can do this rotating, it's a lot safer and a lot more precise. Some hospitals have CyberKnife technology, and that's kind of the coolest of the cool. Imagine an arm. Imagine my arm, how about? That's the only prop I have, basically, me. This hand up here, this is where the radiation is going to come from. It can go here, and it can pivot and go over here, and it can go under you. You're on a bed, the bed rises and lowers, and the radiation arm can go under it and around it, and it's a much, much better way. This video is getting really long, though, so I'm going to cut it short right there. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the basic treatment of cancers. Thank you for watching. This was a lot of fun. I really like talking about the treatments, and I'm excited to get in the specifics. That's going to be really soon. So hopefully you enjoyed. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell your friends if they want to learn more about science. This is where to go. I'll be doing more science later once I'm done with cancer, because this has just been a lot of fun. Alright, thanks.